View from the Gutters presents The Long Run, Episode 12. The Long Run is a special episode where we discuss a book too long to read for a regular episode. This episode, we discuss Akira. Music for this episode provided by Hostile Product from the album Subject 28. Do we know, is this 13?
No, this is 12.
12? Getting ahead of myself again. Welcome to The Long Run, Episode 12. I'm Andrew Chard.
I'm Tobiah Panshin.
I'm Kayleigh Fleeman.
And I'm Cade Reynolds.
And this week,
This quarter
of the year, do we have announcements?
We don't. There are no
nothing?
long run based announcements. This is a special out of continuity episode, so there's nothing to announce.
No one sponsors these?
No.
No, okay.
I also noticed that there was no live stream, so...
Yeah.
This is outside of the normal stream, so it's kind of a bubble unto itself.
Outside the stream of the universe.
Yeah, it's an Elseworlds view from the gutters, if you will.
I see. What if they only did the show every 3 months?
Yeah.
About a really, really long book.
Yeah, basically.
What a sad universe. But yeah.
It's a depressing place, which is why we only visit it occasionally.
Yeah, on our Earth 1, Earth whatever crossovers. Is this Earth Prime? This would be Earth Prime.
God, I hate Earth
Well,
Prime.
not now, because we're in the other universe. I'm confused.
Like, the whole thing about the numeric system is that there's no one Earth that's more special than any other. They're just all numbered, and they could be in any order.
Yeah.
Like, Marvel is Earth 616, because that's just the one that it is.
The
idea that it's like Earth Prime, it's like, this is the best Earth. This is the main Earth.
The reason it's Earth Prime is because it's like when the universe was geocentric. It's like, well, this is where we are, so it's got to be the most important one. Earth Prime's where we live. So, of course, we would think that's Earth Prime. Be like, you guys are all different numbers. And they're like, pretty sure that's not how it works. But apparently, even though we don't have anyone with superpowers, we're right.
Yeah.
Because also, all of the books in the DC universe are written on Earth Prime, which they actually are.
Okay, so that's the way that it was back in the day when Earth
Mind-blowing.
Prime was the Earth where
The DC offices
the
resided.
DC offices were, and also Superboy.
Right.
But I don't think that that's the case now in
Well,
the new DC.
obviously, nothing.
I mean, that's just
Who
the word. I
knows
think
now?
in a
DCU?
universe of bad decisions, one
Yeah.
of their worst is calling their new universe Earth Prime.
Did they do that?
Yeah, in the New 52, the main
Oh.
Earth is Earth Prime.
Oh,
didn't
yeah,
know
because
that.
it was Earth Prime and Earth 2.
Yeah, because there's Earth Prime and there's
Oh my
Earth 2,
God.
and then Earth 1 are the original graphic novel series they put out.
Oh, that's right. Oh, all this is making me want to vomit.
Yeah.
I've been ignoring
it's
DC for
disgusting.
like 3 months, and it's made me so happy. I'm never going back.
This is
Sorry,
going to
everybody.
incredibly date the episode, but I was just reading the sales stats for the last month,
Yeah.
and it was like Marvel 40% of the market, DC like 24% of the market. Like,
Yeah.
Marvel is just destroying DC at this particular moment in time,
Yeah.
which
And
is, I mean, it's kind of sad for anybody who really loves the DC universe.
And I did, and the grieving process is over, and it's dead to me, and I'm okay to walk away now.
Gone through all the stages of grief.
All of the stages are done. Most of them were anger. I don't know if there's other stages. I didn't get to those, but I figure I can just
Stages
skip them.
1 through 6 are anger.
well, there's-
Stage 7 is acceptance.
First is gray anger,
Right.
then green anger,
Right.
then like a
more.
bunch of different kinds of green anger,
Right.
and then red anger,
Right. And then you're done.
and then you're done.
Yeah.
This
you've
sounds
hit the whole
suspiciously like
spectrum.
the Hulk.
The Hulk or the color spectrum. We're not.
Yeah, the color
Doesn't
spectrum
red
is
have
just
more
gray,
energy?
green, red.
Yeah, that's
That's
what I
that's
see.
the color spectrum. That's all I
Did
see.
you guys watch what's the show with the dog that talks?
Wishbone?
To Elijah Wood? Not Wishbone.
Oh,
Close though.
Wilfred.
Yeah, when he's like, I don't know, Ryan. Why is the sky gray? Why is the grass gray? Why is the rainbow gray, and ultra gray? It's like the best line of that whole show. Because he's a dog. Do you guys get it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Colorblind.
is that a show? I thought it was a movie.
There's a show
No.
too.
There's two shows. There's one in Australia, which is the original, And then the same guy who played the dog in the Australian one played him again in the American one.
That's interesting.
It's weird.
There was also a movie too.
Was there?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
But the dog is like a guy in a dog suit.
You're right. I knew that.
He talks to him.
Like, I've
It's
seen
hilarious.
like little clips from it. It's
pretty
I never
funny.
watched it.
I thought it was.
The movie's actually really old by now too.
Yeah, because it was Elijah Wood like before he did The Hobbit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or not The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings.
What? No.
Yeah, was
No?
there an Elijah Wood before then?
No, the one with Elijah Wood is new.
Oh, okay.
Way newer.
Okay.
It's
I'm
way
wrong.
post Lord of the Rings. I don't know about the movie. I have no idea what that's about. Anyway,
I'm totally thinking
everyone
something
has
completely
Googled
different.
it already and knows more than we do. So we will be talking about Akira this week, which
Yes.
is my pick. And I recommended to everyone that they watch the movie and then read the manga. So if you didn't watch the movie, you have to stop, pause the episode because
I did not rewatch the movie.
You've seen it
I've
before.
seen it previously.
Kayleigh,
Kayleigh
you watched
got-
the movie?
I did not watch the movie.
Kayleigh got really angry at the manga, and she's like, maybe I'll watch the movie
Mm-hmm.
and I'll like it more. And I was like, watching that movie is not going to make you like anything or understand anything better than you already do.
The movie's great, though. You should have watched
It
it.
is,
I mean, not
yet
for the...
I don't think that it would have its intended effect.
I don't know. I think part of the reason why I recommend watching the movie first before reading the manga is the manga is set at a pace that is just like, ready, go, and then it just starts going, and you have no idea what's happening. Like, none of it is explained. You can read manga so much faster than you can read Western comics just because that's how it's set up, that if you don't read manga all the time, it can really throw you at first. It takes you a while to get your like manga legs. And I think what the movie does to help you with that is it has moments of like pacing where it just shows them riding across the city and you get to feel the scale of Tokyo, the scope of the destruction. You feel the tension and the anger and the speed at which certain things are happening. And so once you've seen the movie and you go to read the manga, you don't feel lost ever. You know
Yeah.
who Yamaguta and Tetsuo and Kaneda and Kei are. You've met the whole bike gang. You've seen the clowns. Like, you know who everybody is. You know the general and then the guy with the long hair who's got like the chipmunk teeth, whose name I can never remember. He was like a... In the movie, he's feeding information to Ryu and their organization. But in the book... He's just like a corrupt politician type guy.
Oh,
he's the one who
that
captures
dude.
Akira.
Right.
Right. So like it sets that guy, so you get to know what he's kind of all about. It sets up like the council that and they're like, we're gonna expel you, General. You're not gonna be able to be in charge of the military anymore. And that's why he stages the coup in the film, which is different than why he does it in the book. It just kind of like sets up who everybody is and like what their role is. It leaves some characters out, which is fine because they're introduced to you in a better way in the manga than they wouldn't fit in the movie. Like the woman, subject 19, like she's not in the film really. There's a woman who looks like her, but she doesn't have powers or anything. She's just on the bridge when the bridge collapses. She's like leading the charge in the movie. That scene doesn't happen in the book, but it sets up who the kids are and like how their powers work and how terrifying they are. Like that whole scene in the bedroom, which is 2 panels in the manga of what's his name? How did I just forget that?
Which
The guy that gets the powers. It's not Akira.
Tetsuo.
Tetsuo's in the room and he wakes up and a glass shatters on the headboard, and that's like the first time you realize he has powers. But in the movie, that scene is incredibly better because it is like they appear to him in those like Five Nights at Freddy's 4, like the giant bear and the rabbit.
Yes.
and
Okay. The whole
car
thing
comes
in like
out,
the
milk
like
is
fake
pouring on
bedroom
him. Yeah.
area in the military complex
Yeah.
where all the other test subjects are.
Well, yeah, and then he like goes and finds them, and he's just like obliterating all those guys all the way through. Like it sets up why Tetsuo's powers work a lot better. Like the movie does a lot of the legwork for the manga, and when Akira came over to the U.S., the movie is what people remember because I think the movie came first to the U.S. I think Marvel adapted the manga after the movie came out, and the movie it was like a renaissance of animation. Like, it is considered one of the most groundbreaking animation projects of all time because of the amount of parallaxing, like the number of effects that happen in that film. It was a massive undertaking. Like, the fact that they used depth of field, which is a really difficult technique in animation. And
I think it really defined people's expectations about what anime was for a decade and a half.
It was, yeah. And so the manga movie invasion in the early 90s, like movies like Ninja Scroll, Akira, Ghost in the Shell.
All the like sex and ultra-violence stuff.
Those are the ones that made it to the US at like select theaters because fans of anime who were like watching fan dub VHS tapes that you would trade at conventions and stuff wrote enough letters to movie theaters to be like, bring this over, and they would show it with subtitles, and then eventually animation studios in the US bought them and bought the rights to put dubs in.
I grew up going to science fiction conventions, and my dad was getting this stuff like as it was circulating as bootlegs.
Yeah.
And I remember him talking about how he first saw Akira like just raw, no subtitles, no dubs.
Yeah.
And being able to understand it for about the first half and then it making no goddamn sense.
Yeah.
And then later he saw it subtitled and he understood it for about the first half and then it started making no goddamn sense. The original dub was just
really bad.
Really bad.
Yeah. The new dub is much better. I still like watching it in Japanese with the actual
subs. It definitely makes a lot more sense.
Just because
now.
they didn't do what they do now, which is where they'll take the raw footage and adjust it, speed it up and slow it down so that the lip syncing is closer. Like, you can definitely tell that they are speaking over the animations that are perfectly dubbed to the Japanese syllables, and then the American actors are just trying to match them. So when people are like yelling really awkwardly in the movie, it's just because like that's the way the mouth looked and they were trying to match it. But now they'll do like all this computer slowing down and speeding up of the mouth and like isolation to adjust mouths and stuff. So dubbing's gotten...
I didn't realize that was a thing.
A lot. Oh yeah, they like actually reanimate a lot of the film to dub it to especially films like Miyazaki movies and like big budget animation stuff.
I basically exclusively watch stuff subtitled.
Yeah, dubbing's come a long way. Like, I really like I like watching them for different reasons in different languages. Like, I like the American voice actors they get, and you can kind of like, it's easier to follow the story if you're not really paying attention to the film. So, like, if it's just on in the background.
No, absolutely.
But the performance of the original Japanese voice actors 9 times out of 10 is better. And a lot of the reason is because they often record in the same room. Like, while they're having a conversation with each other. Like the way that Bob's Burgers does.
Yeah, I think more Western animation is doing it that way now than they used to.
Well, the part of the reason is because they'll do the performance live with the original Japanese actors, and then the animators will go back and animate stuff around like how they performed it. And then once the finished animation comes back to the West, they can't change the performance. So the American actors are always having to match the tone or the intensity of what the animation looks like. The animation is based on the original voice acting sometimes, so it's like a weird kind of deal.
Yeah.
Where like Bob's Burgers is animated as their voice recording, so they can get a lot of the performance out, but they all stand around a set of microphones and do voiceover that way. So it lets the like quippy conversational nature of it feel more natural.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I almost exclusively watch the dubbed versions, but partially because I don't know how to read subtitles while I'm also playing Minecraft.
Yeah, that is tough.
That's fair.
Yeah. That's how I do it with shows that are like more than 12 episodes. So if I'm going to watch like 100 episodes of the show, like I'm going to need to have something else to do while I'm watching it.
No, if I'm playing something like Minecraft, I've got almost exclusively old TV shows on.
Yeah.
Like old sitcoms or like Star Trek or something where I've like seen it and I don't have to be watching the screen to know what's going on. I can just be listening to it.
Audiobooks, man. It's the jam.
That too.
Yeah.
Audiobooks and
I can do
podcasts.
audiobooks.
Yeah.
But mostly I just turn on Netflix and I'm like, I haven't seen this show in years.
Yeah.
Beast Wars.
Ugh.
Best
I love
Transformers
it,
show.
but it's not.
I mean, the animation's janky as hell, but
Yeah.
gotta
It's still
love
cool. Optimus Primal.
I had like most of the toys growing up.
Oh, me too.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's actually get into Akira the manga though.
Yeah.
And I'd like to start with Kayleigh and Cade.
I did want to say one thing. After reading the manga, or at least the first 2 volumes of the manga, after watching the movie, I think I would have preferred it without watching the movie.
And that's fair because the first 2 are like considerably, they're similar, but they're still a lot different in like what order some stuff happens in and like how some of the characters act and stuff. I recommend the movie, but
I remember like I had to go back a couple times because like the way I was reading the characters, I didn't really understand who they were in the movie because they sounded different. Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I did watch the dubbed version, so maybe that made a difference, but like I didn't like read the same tone of voices. And I didn't always know because some of the characters look very similar. So I didn't always know what was going on. So I probably, when I looked back after reading those 2 issues, I was like, I almost wish I hadn't watched the movie. This was my first time watching it, so I didn't have all that or I didn't go into watching the movie having seen it before,
right?
Like at a younger time in my life. So I was very much an adult critiquing it. But I mean, yeah, I felt that a little lost in those first 2 volumes after having watched the movie.
Well, I think for me, it helped me like figure out what was going on because I watched the movie years ago, and then I think 2 years ago I started buying the manga and reading it, and it had been a while since I had watched the movie. So like while I knew who everybody was, I didn't like watch it and then read it back to back, and so I think having the exposure to the movie in the past like helped me to like kind of feel familiar with it. So I guess the best recommendation is watch the movie and then in 3 to 10 years read the book.
There you go.
And then you'll have the experience that I had.
Well, really what you should do is like watch 10 minutes of the movie and then read like
I did a
chapter of the manga and then watch 10 more minutes of the movie.
I did it, but not
just go back and forth.
I did it, but not on purpose this time. I was like watching the movie at home, and I was like, all right, I got to go to work. And then I'd go to work, and I'd be like reading on my breaks. And then I would go home and watch a little bit more of the movie. And it's like, oh, I got to go do something else. And I was like reading, and it was like weird. I did it on accident, but it was kind of fun. It would have been weird had I never seen the movie before.
Yeah, I
that
think
would
so.
have been awful.
That would have been kind of creepy.
Yeah. But yeah, so no one else had read the manga before this episode.
I had seen the anime, but
Right,
never
okay.
read the manga.
So yeah, so Cade or Kayleigh, did you want to start and talk about, kind of your first exposure to how much you love manga?
So for me, manga and I don't really get along except for, I guess, the most manga of the manga. Like I love Fruits Basket. It's perfect. It's great in every way.
I mean, it's shoujo.
Yeah.
It's not like the definition of manga. I don't think of Fruits Basket.
Well, I guess for manga that I would read, I don't know. Anyway,
I mean, it's like saying the most comic booky comic.
Yeah, is Archie.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
See, we agree on that, so therefore
Yeah.
it's a universal.
I was going to say Betty and Veronica Digest.
No, it's close, but not quite. It's Archie and Jughead Adventures.
But I have a lot of issues, and this is purely personal preference with the pacing in manga and a lot of the things that writers and illustrators decide to spend time on versus the things that they just kind of blow through is really frustrating to me as a reader. So I tend to stray away from manga because this has kind of been a thing that's like, I know I'll get frustrated if I read this. So reading Akira definitely brought up a lot of my personal frustration with that, which was a part of the reason why reading it, I was like, this is awful. looking back on it, it really isn't that awful. It's just not my personal preference. But I could definitely see the things that it did that were immensely influential, and why this would be so highly praised as like this great work. I was looking online for Sparks notes to see if I could cheat and maybe not read a volume or two. I read two volumes. I felt like nothing happened. It was like everything and nothing happened at the same time.
There was so much faffing about.
I don't know. Maybe I read differently than you guys because I was like, click, 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 click. 400 pages are gone. How long's it been? 10 minutes. Like, that's how long it takes to read a volume of Akira. Is like,
I get that, but it was just a lot of it was my own personal, like, dramatically sighing and having to stop. Ugh, I have to read this.
Yeah. I mean, I get into a mental state where it just becomes a slog.
I didn't necessarily have a problem with it, but I do recognize that manga is very differently paced, and if you're not used to it, it can feel heavy.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely... We talked about it on Out of the Fridge a couple times because Mannix doesn't read manga at all. So we read Sailor Moon and Wandering Sun, and on both of them, he's like, I just feel like I miss stuff, like, in between the panels. It's like, I mean, it is a lot different. Like, Western manga tends to show you more of this is a sequence and it happens specifically in this order, where sometimes manga feels like, well, this is basically what happened.
Yeah, like jumps around.
It gets you from point A to point B. Transitions are like, why do you need them?
Yeah.
There's also a lot more, I think, landscape shots in manga where they're just like, they're establishing shots showing you the area where things are happening, and maybe somebody's talking a little bit during it, but nothing's really happening.
Yeah.
Or you're seeing the same person just in different spots.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that doesn't bother me, but that's because I don't know, I tend to like exposition, honestly. Like, it just in comics, usually if a book is really just expository, it's usually a thing I like.
Okay. Were you here for any of the Earth X, Universe X episodes?
No, thank you.
If you like exposition, boy.
Not like that. Not like that exposition. Like Lemony Snicket exposition. Also, not the fault of Akira, but I just got 2 new books in the mail that I've been wanting to read, and I've been trying to read them, but every time I read them, I feel guilty about not reading Akira.
I did that this week, too.
So it was just like, I would open up A Natural History of Dragons, and I'd look over at my computer, and Akira is still open. It's like, I'll get to you eventually, but this is better, and this is what I want to read, and I've been waiting for this in the mail, so... So not the fault of Akira, but definitely colored my opinion of it. One of the things that really bothered me, and I could see this as a trope in a lot of manga, is sort of the casual sexual harassment. Just as a thing that constantly happens. How do you pronounce it? Kaneda?
Kaneda.
Kaneda?
That's how they say it
okay.
in the movie.
Sounds like Canada.
I mean, if you watch the movie, you maybe know.
Well, I'm sorry.
I swear half the dialogue in the last half of the movie is just one of them will yell, Canada, and the other one will yell, Tetsuo. That's it. Yep. 20 minutes of dialogue is that.
Perfect.
Not an exaggeration.
But he definitely with a K,
Yeah.
Would just like say things to her where you're like, wow, that's kind of rude, you little shit. And then it was just kind of played off, and the guards would harass her, and it was just like this constant thing. And you see that in a lot of other manga, and you definitely see that in Japanese culture as an issue. And so that really bothered me.
But I don't think it's ever played off. Like, I think he goes to harass her and she punches him in the face. Like, it's a setup for why Kay is a different character than, and I'm not like making excuses for this. This is just a different situation. The movie sets up that relationship between them better because Kay calls him out on his shit right away. She gets him out. He gets her out of custody from the police in the film. And he's like, hey, I got you out. How about a drink sometime? I think you owe me whatever. And she's like, I think you're a skirt chaser. I think you'll just do whatever you want if a pretty girl's involved. And he's like, what? No, babe. And then she leaves. She just disappears. And I think that sets up their relationship a bit better. Is he's just like this horrible flirt,
Okay.
And she and him just keep running into each other. And then eventually it's like, oh, well, we're doing the same thing. The book sets that up very differently because he sees her or in a different, they like meet under different circumstances.
Right.
And it sets it up weird. And I think that once the kind of like apocalypse event happens, then the like not casual but express sexual harassment / implied rape that every woman faces in that apocalypse situation is part of the danger of having, like, it's supposed to be part of the danger that you feel while watching multiple female characters. Because in the last half of the book, there are more female characters.
Yeah.
You have Chioko, you have Kay, and you have, I can never remember her name. The little girl that Tetsuo.
Is it Suki?
No, it's like, and she's a different character in the movie too. She's his girlfriend pre him getting powers
Okay.
in the movie. So it's not like, hey, you survived my rape and drugs. Let's be friends, which is how the book happened.
Yeah.
Which is
Well,
really
and
weird.
that was what really.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of that where, to me, it felt like at best it set up sexual harassment as like that sort of slapstick comedy, like, oh, haha, he said a thing and now he gets punched because that's silly.
Well,
But-
that is actually a very old, like Japanese, like traditional comedy routine.
Right.
And I'm not excusing it, but there's a cultural and historical context there.
Yeah.
Well, and
no,
also,
absolutely.
It
But
only works not because it's like, oh, look at how funny Canada is. It's like, he shouldn't do that.
Yeah. And
That's,
I
the
think
joke only works if you know that he's doing something wrong.
right.
and I think the manga sets him up specifically, like it presents him as an asshole.
Yeah.
At the very beginning. I mean, the fact that he's part of the delinquent gang, his interaction with the nurse at the school.
Yeah.
Where he's
Yeah.
basically like blackmailing her into like giving him drugs.
Yep. Which is not in the movie.
He is not a good person.
No.
I feel like getting back to Kayleigh's original point, though, I do feel like it is a problem in manga in general, just because of the Japanese culture. There are a lot of books. I mean, even the Pokemon manga is guilty of this, where it's like, it's perfectly natural for a guy to say, "Hey, sweet cheeks, we should go get a drink sometime."
Yeah.
But
And it's
And
like, I mean, and then she's just like, "Oh, buzz off."
you know,
And
the
like,
thing is the other half of this is not an inherent cultural problem with Japan. This is an inherent cultural world problem of catcalling and harassing.
Yes.
How many movies from the 1980s had catcalling and harassing as like a major plot point in some
Oh,
way? It's like a
absolutely.
woman has to deal
No,
with it. This
what
was
I-
written in 88.
The girl's
Yeah.
name is
Like-
Kaori.
Kaori, thank you. It was written in like the late 80s where it was just like sexual harassment was not only a day-to-day thing that people dealt with, it was also expressly like, that's just the way life is in the media. Like there was
No, that's-
it shouldn't be this way.
That's fair, but I feel like it's highlighted more in manga than in Western comic books.
I think it depends. I mean, it depends on what manga you read, I guess, because
It's also easier to notice things from other cultures than from your own culture.
Right.
That's
definitely.
fair.
And I don't want to have like a imperialistic type standpoint of like, this is bad because it's a different culture, but it is something that you notice a lot in manga and in a lot of anime, and you still notice even in animes and mangas that are considerably newer. You see it as sort of, it is, yeah, you're not supposed to do it, and that's why it's funny, but similar to a lot of rape jokes, but who is getting that? Like, who's actually getting that joke, and who is not getting it, and what damage does that do? So to me, that was just like a frustrating thing that kind of colored this as a whole. Was just like, oh, look at that, like casual harassment. Oh, there it is. Oh, there's
Yeah, I mean-
like illusions of rape. Oh, look there. You know, like
I guess the other question is something I asked the girls on and out of the fridge episode about, like, what is the purpose of authorship? When is it more important to be authentic, or is it more important to teach society a lesson with that? Because the authenticity of having a street bike gang be rude to women puts you in a specific place. It's part of the setting.
right.
So regardless of whether people are reading it and getting the like, oh, this is wrong or oh, this is right, like it's part of the setting. Like
Right.
these men are delinquents. They're bad people. They're not a part of society. They treat women poorly. They steal, they rob, they kill. I mean, treating women poorly is one of the least offensive things they do because of all of the murdering and drug and blackmail and getting women pregnant and then not taking care of their children. Like, there's a lot of bad stuff they do.
No, and that's absolutely a fair point. But it also becomes an issue of what's the responsibility of the audience. You can say that the author does or does not have a responsibility to represent, and that's kind of up to the author to decide. But ultimately, it is up to the audience to kind of point this out and say, see, this is problematic because of that. When Tony Stark says something in the Marvel movies and stuff like that, you know it's because Tony Stark is an asshole.
Right.
But if nobody talks about it, if nobody says, oh, he said this thing because he's a dick, and him saying this further proves the point that he's a dick, then people might hear that and see that as, oh, well, this cool character, or this character who's presented as the hero, or this character that I'm supposed to be following and who has some traits that are similar to mine or that I would like to emulate. I should emulate all of his traits because he's in this role of hero or protagonist. So you as the audience need to say, no, this is problematic.
Yeah, it's normalizing.
I actually have an example if I could play off that for a minute. I used to be a caretaker for disabled people after I was an EMT. Okay, I have a weird history. And we actually had this one guy who was developmentally disabled come in and say, it's okay to lie to women. They're not people, which was a direct quote he heard on Family Guy. But nobody was around to tell him that that's not the case.
Yeah.
That the guy was, it was meant to be an asshole-ish joke, but nobody was there to tell him.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I was actually having a very similar conversation with Kit just a couple of days ago. And we were talking about the Hunger Games, which she had me watch the movies, and then I sat down and read the books, and I was talking to her about them. And I'm not going to spoil anything from those books. But there is a incident that happens in them that I was really upset about, and I said as much. And her response was, but that's what happens in war. Like, that's realistic. Sometimes these things just happen, and they're upsetting, and you have to deal with that. And I said, yeah, but this isn't real. It's fiction. And as fiction, it has to operate according to the dictates of story logic, which is different from real logic, that everything that happens in the story has a meaning independent of the events that are happening. And we got into a very long conversation about the distinction between, like, what is the purpose of the story? Is the purpose of the story to tell a sequence of events that may have emotional impact of one kind or another? Or is there sort of a higher purpose or a message that a story necessarily has to have, and which is conveyed by the events? Because, of course, there is no, well, obviously this has to happen because that's what happened in a story. There's an author behind a keyboard who's writing everything down and decides what happens. So if something happens in a story, it's not because, well, sometimes that's what happens. It's because the author specifically decided that that was what goes on. And we didn't really come to a firm resolution because I was very much of the camp that a story has to have a higher meaning or a meta text of some kind. And she took kind of the opposite position, that it's really about, the characters and what's happening in the story and the emotional impact of those events independent of some larger meaning.
Well, it's absolutely 100% both.
Yes,
because,
and that's the point that I was getting to.
Because yes, sometimes an author will sit down and be like, I have this really important character arc to tell about a person, and the best way for me to tell that is set during a war, so yeah, people die. Because that is, in fact, the setting. But if there's another author that sits down that's like, well, I want to show the horrors of war and why that's not, like, why it shouldn't be like this, like, I can make adjustments because I'm telling a different story than that other author who was also writing about war. Author's intent may not matter to, you as an interpreter of the story, but it has a lot to do with why they make. I mean, it's obviously why they make the choices they make.
Right. And so bringing that back around to Akira, like, yes, I absolutely agree. Like, these are juvenile delinquents. They act like assholes because that's what juvenile delinquents are like. But there comes a moment or a level at which the author is making specific decisions about what kind of characters are in their story and how they want to present them and what kind of story that they want to tell, where I think that they have a certain obligation narratively to say, like, hey, this guy is an asshole. The way that he's acting is bad. And you are supposed to not like him in that moment, even if he's the protagonist.
And I think there's also an argument to be made about whether or not Kaneda is actually a protagonist.
I think he is a protagonist.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say he is the hero of this story, because he's really not.
I don't even know that he is the main protagonist of the story. Tetsuo's arc, and more specifically Kei's arc, have a lot more weight and a lot more focus put on them. As far as page count goes, those two have innumerably more pages and more arc than Kaneda, who goes from, I want to, kill this little kid and whatever because he hurt my friend. In the movie, he's the reason that Tetsuo gets in the bike wreck and gets hurt.
Is it
that in that way in the comic too? I couldn't remember. So like it's all about revenge for like what happened to a member of his bike gang, and then when a member of his bike gang becomes ultra powerful, he's like, well, I need to end this because it's my responsibility. Like his arc doesn't really go anywhere. He's the same tone basically from the beginning to the end. He's a lot more empathetic of the people around him at the end of the story. But still, it's all about like protecting his crew, which he's now added K to. But it's not and Joker. But it's not necessarily like he doesn't feel better towards everyone. And at the end, like the whole Neo Tokyo is his crew.
Right.
So
something my brother has said a lot is character growth is when a character would do something different at the end of the story than how they would at the beginning of the story. And in that case, or in that sense, Tetsuo really doesn't grow very much as a character at all.
Tetsuo or Kaneda?
Or even Kaneda.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, Kaneda doesn't grow, really, in that definition. And I think that characters like Tetsuo and Kei have a much larger arc, a much, I guess, broader arc. I don't know. More stuff
happens to
They're
them
more different at the end
pages.
than they were different at the beginning.
Yep.
I'm real intelligent. But specifically,
Absolutely.
Kei's arc, which is something that another reason I kind of wanted everyone to watch the film is Kei is almost a non-existent player in the film. Like she's barely in it, and she doesn't really do anything cool. And in the manga, she's amazing. Like she's shoots from the hip, quick thinking. Like she doesn't seem like a side player in the revolution. Like she's very much a major part of it. And then being a
medium.
Another thing that confused me about the movie and the manga together.
Right. I mean, they definitely made choices when they adapted the manga to film, and the director of the film is the writer of the manga.
I didn't know
Otomo, yeah. He also directed an amazing movie called Memories, which is 3 short stories, and they're all phenomenal. They made some interesting choices when they adapted the movie, and I think that Kei's role in the book is really important, and
it would be really interesting to me to see what choices they would make if they turn this into, say, like a TV series today, and actually had like enough time to do the entire story.
Yeah,
because I think the biggest detriment to the movie is just that it's only so long.
Yeah.
And it only covers so much, and they kind of have to wrap things up quickly, much in the way that Nausicaa does.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the movie's only 2 hours, and it barely covers the first 2 books.
Yeah.
It covers parts of the first 2 books.
Conveniently, though, the 3rd book picks off exactly where the movie ended.
Yeah, if at the end of the movie, instead of there being no Akira, there was Akira, then it would be like the same. So,
yeah.
I mean, the ending would like lead you right into. There's still some stuff you'd miss.
I definitely remember watching the movie and getting to the end and going, "Who the hell is Akira? who the fuck are they talking about through this? Like, is he God? Like, was he a metaphor? Like, what the fuck is going on?
Well, they show his organs. Like, he was a kid.
Okay.
And then he caused the explosion.
Yeah, I guess I don't remember it very well. 'Cause it's been like 10 years since I watched it.
Yeah, so in the movie, he shares the same origin story as he does in the book, where Akira was one of the Project 20s. Like, he's number 28, where, like, the other three little, like, Progeric children are all different numbers in the 20s. So they were all in school together. And then Akira, like, something happens to him, and he causes the explosion, and then they basically dissect him in the movie because they have all his organs in jars, and that's what they kept in that underground place.
Okay.
And so when Tetsuo goes in there, they're like, this is it. This is Akira. This is the guy you're looking for. He's just organs in jars. But it brings up the whole point about the Big Bang living inside everyone's DNA. So Tetsuo, like, pulls Akira's energy out, possibly, of his organs.
Okay.
And then he turns into a giant baby, squishy baby flesh monster.
Yeah. That was the point where, like, definitely lost me. It's like, okay, so he turned into a baby?
Yeah.
And then
He's a fetus.
absorbed things? And
Yeah.
then what? Like,
Yeah. He regressed
yeah.
into a giant fetus.
Ugh.
Yeah.
It was interesting going back and reading this and just looking at all the points in which it has been influential. Because, of course, this was early cyberpunk. But you can see things like the clown gang influencing the Jokers from Batman Beyond.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there are a lot of Akira references in Batman Beyond, up to and including the movie that kind of capstoned the series, The Return of the Joker, which has a giant orbital laser that's, like, shooting down at the city.
Yep.
Which was super cool. And just a lot of the look and feel of this, I think, has been repeated and kind of picked up.
There's a scene in the film where after Tetsuo explodes on his bike, Canada drives past him and then turns his bike and it, like, skids sideways. There's a YouTube montage of every time that's ever happened in a movie after Akira.
I need to look that up.
A ton.
Because they even did that in Batman or the Batman Robin Adventures, whatever the second version of the Batman animated series was.
It's in that. It's in, like, Ninja Turtles, the cartoon. Like, it's in tons of stuff. Just that bike turning sideways is in, like, a huge amount of things. Not to mention just, like, the number of tonal similarities between Akira and a lot of movies to come after, stuff like The Matrix, which was definitely influenced by Otomo. And I mean, it's a huge amount of movies.
Yeah, the look of Tetsuo is something that has been copied over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, even Dragon Ball Z, with the, like, floating rocks and the way that, like, stuff will crumble because their power is, like, so powerful.
Oh yeah,
I feel like was definitely influenced by Tetsuo's power in Akira. Also, there's a sweet Akira reference in a super old episode of South Park where it's the Trapper Keeper episode.
Oh yeah.
It's like
where Cartman turns into the giant fetus baby.
Yeah, yeah, that's totally an Akira.
Yeah,
reference.
absolutely.
I love it. It's also got it's got Terminator references and 2001: A Space Odyssey references in it too. But that was a big one.
Fantastic Four had a hospital scene that was, like, the ultimate Akira.
Oh, really? The new Fantastic Four?
Yes.
Oh God, that thing.
Yay! So good for that movie.
It was just like, I'm watching Akira right now. This is Akira.
Yeah, it's definitely influenced a ton of stuff. And I think that it's because it was kind of the first manga / animated anime film that a lot of directors who are now directors saw it. Like, same with stuff like Ghost in the Shell, which definitely influenced a lot of the Wachowskis on The Matrix as well.
Yeah.
It was like that same type of era. And I think this, as far as manga is concerned, definitely influenced a lot of the way that shonen would be written for the next, 10 10, 20 years. Because even stuff like Gantz, which it just has like a bunch of grotesque, giant, weird monster-like things being blown apart by laser guns. Like that's, I mean, even just that in and of itself was definitely an Akira.
Yeah.
Someone was influenced by Akira for that. And the art style too is very like that super clean line, hyper detailed buildings. And I look at this book and I'm almost positive none of this was done with computer assistance. And just think how long it would have taken to draw those buildings.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And just how detailed some of the action sequences, which I read in like 30 seconds, like how many days it took to draw the battleship being torn apart and exploding, or when Tetsuo jumps to the battleship and is like morphing all of it and he's got all the like tentacle stuff coming out of his arm, and how intricate all that is.
And some of the scenes where Tokyo is being destroyed again.
Yeah.
It's just like, holy shit. Like, how much fucking detail can you put into a building being smashed?
Yeah. But it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful in its detail. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
As far as just like a visual feast, despite some of the problems I have with story and stuff. I think it's interesting how big of a character arc some of these people go on. The general, specifically, like how he kind of morphs character to character, I think is a cool story.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to criticize this story on some level, just because of all the things that are happening in this book. A lot of them aren't the story. Most of them, in fact, I think. Like, so much of what this story is about is in the visual storytelling. Like, when I actually look at what the story is, it's borderline incomprehensible, even in the manga. Like, it's just so much fucking like back and forth and running around, and what the fuck is even happening at this point. That it's really hard for me to kind of say anything too meaningful about it. But in terms of like the influence that it's had, and the way that so much of what we look at, both in the East and the West, has at least a foot in Akira, like, it's hard to undersell how important it is if you really want to understand kind of the evolution of graphic media.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal book. I don't know that it excludes itself from any kind of critique, but it is hard to talk about the story in this book because in a lot of ways, I think one of the strengths of it is it feels like what it would feel like to be in a kind of post-apocalyptic setting in which it's just like, I got to get this person from here to there so that they can get water or medicine. And then it's like, it's very much a survival story where you're following each of these people. And it's like, this person has to get over there and then they have to get back over here. And just the traveling itself is dangerous. And I think that although some of it is just like running around and kind of nonsensical, it adds to the hectic feeling of, well, I mean, the only thing that's important to a lot of these people is, one, stopping Tetsuo, but two, protecting their friends.
Yeah, something that is interesting to me is the way that Japanese media tends to treat the apocalypse, specifically, and societal breakdown in general. I think probably because their society is very controlled and stratified, and it's very much about, like, what does the society need? What are the cultural expectations here? Like, it's less about what you personally want to do or want from your life and more about what the expectation is for you. That when society breaks down in a story, you see so much of, you know, people going wild, like just reckless abandoning, like, oh, there's no rules now. I'm going to rape and murder everybody. It's going to be fun. It's awesome. I don't have to be responsible to anybody. And then you have the people who are like, oh, society's broken down. Okay, I'm king now. Yeah. I'm in charge. Everybody rally around me. This is new Tokyo Empire. Completely different thing. We're in charge now. New Tokyo Empire. And like that, it seems to be a repeating motif that I see, that like when things start to break down, like everybody goes fucking nuts. Like there's no movement for like any kind of control or rehabilitation or people putting things back together again. It's just, nope, everything's crazy. Everybody's warlords.
Well, I think it's kind of, it's what people assume would happen in that kind of situation. And I think that a lot of that assumption is based on the fact that these people didn't like the society that was happening. And in this case, very specifically in the film, you see the dichotomy of the society that survived. You see the rich eating and dining in these really super high-rise buildings and being in like really nice restaurants and whatever. And then you see Tetsuo and his gang are in boarding school. They reform, they're like orphans and like they're in abject poverty, and all they do is like run around and try to get drugs. And it shows how fractured the previous society was thanks to the original Akira event and then World War III following it. So this is almost like an apocalypse of an already kind of apocalyptic, it's like stages of apocalypse in this. And I think that that's what sets it apart from this, but from other stuff. But I think that this definitely reminds me of what the Mad Max apocalypse assumes too, where it's like, well, yeah, there are warlords and there are people who just are trying to survive, and there are the masses who are not capable of being warlords. And if they ever try to put anything back together, like Gastown, then these warlords drive up and like, you know, tell you to walk away from the gasoline.
Yeah, but the Akira event happens just over Tokyo. Like the rest of Japan's fine. Like it's just that one area.
Right.
Where legitimately like a large portion of their population is. But still, like most of the country is still like running around just fine.
I mean, to be fair though, do we really know if the rest of Australia is okay in the Mad Max apocalypse? Like we don't, that could just be like what Perth looks like actually.
Well, I mean,
I thought it was a documentary of Australia.
But I'm assuming that based on like the whole, like the Great Salt and all that, like it's not just them.
No, for sure. But the other thing about it is you're right. Like it doesn't happen to the rest of Japan, but they're unwilling to leave their home. They're like, this is where I live and I'm not leaving. And I think that I'm sure there are people that did leave, and maybe everyone who was sensible left, and the only people that are left are the ones that are like, nope, this is the way I like it. I love living in crazy town.
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
And you know what? I've met a lot of people who I'm like, yeah, they would love living in crazy town because they almost live there full time already.
And they own banana pants.
Yeah.
This is Olympia.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And that definitely colors a lot of the opinions of people I meet. But I don't know. I think it sometime does pass between
it's
Tetsuo.
A few months.
Yeah. So I imagine everybody that wanted to get out.
That's actually probably true.
At least tried, and maybe they made it or maybe they didn't. But the people that stayed, I always imagined were the people who were already living sort of like that in the pre-blast in the book, because they were kind of like biker gangs and living on the street and just kind of
post first blast, pre
second blast.
Second blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The post World War III like fractured society that they were already living in.
Well, and it's obvious that Hiroshima and Nagasaki has a major influence on how Japanese culture and Japanese media views and treats like massive destructive things. Yeah. And that's something that in the West we don't have to deal with. So our idea of post-apocalyptic is much more romantic. Because we never really had to suffer through that. And so that's definitely a huge factor, I think, in people who choose to stay in the once was new Tokyo and things like that, because you have a culture that's already been through so much pain, that's had to give up their homes, had to leave areas that are still completely inhabitable,
Hospitable.
Sure.
And uninhabitable.
Uninhabitable.
That one.
Unhospitable.
It was a combination of those two words. So
and I
definitely
think
pronounced it
neologism.
correctly.
Yeah. I think also you have to remember that the West has a very different mythos about atomic power than Japan does. When people are exposed to atomic power in the West, they become superheroes. But when they're exposed to atomic power, or when anything is exposed to atomic power in Japan, they become monsters. So we have Godzilla, we have Akira, we have Tetsuo, we have these. It's an uncontrollable power. It is above and beyond anything any human should ever meddle with. It's a force of nature. And I think that mythos has a lot to do with why this book's apocalypse is the way that it is. And the fact that you have that international team of scientists who are like, but the power, like,
with
look at
the one Buddhist monk,
Yeah,
because
like-
you got to have a Buddhist monk
Yeah.
there to dispense wisdom.
Right. And it's just like, look at the power in Tetsuo. It's like, you're not even, like, you're too close. You're looking at a wall and not seeing the house. Like, you don't even know. You don't get it. Like, your data doesn't tell you what this is. You have no idea what I'm going through. And I think that narrative of what true atomic power, true power is my favorite part of the last book. That kind of exploration of.
Man, that's the part that was just all gibberish to me.
I mean, it is gibberish,
Or
but
like,
it's
it's the power that moves the earth.
Yeah.
Like, it's rotational force? What?
Well, he's comparing, like, have you ever, what it is. You know what rotational force is.
Right.
You can calculate how much power and how much energy is expended in a rotation of the earth. And you could tell me the answer to how much energy it would take to stop the earth from spinning. Mm-hmm. But have you ever experienced that power? Like, does it mean anything to you?
Right.
And I think that whole Tetsuo isn't full of power. He is while he's trying to fight it, but when he becomes the most powerful, it's when he's like become a conduit for the power. He's like, it's, the power of the universe is flowing through me, like the force or whatever mythical like key or
it's
force
midichlorians.
or
It's all
metachlorians or whatever.
midichlorians.
Like it is as similar to that. And I just like the whole philosophy of, what is the universe? What is the energy of the universe? Where does it go? Because science tells us that energy can't be destroyed or created, that it just changes. And so the vibrations of the universe is a causality. And so I think the whole, it could cause a mini Big Bang or another Big Bang is the whole kind of like, it's though that energy, the vibration of the Big Bang never left. It's just in a different place now.
Well, it's everywhere.
Right. And then Tetsuo is like channeling the everywhere power. So,
Yeah.
it is babble. I'm not saying it's not like scientific babble.
No, I
but
mean,
it is-
I get that.
It is-
It's just that at a certain point, I'm like, these are just words.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally how I feel when anyone tries to explain the backstory of a universe, like a fictional universe to me.
Yeah.
I'm just like, just show me what it is. Like, I don't need to know how the rocks formed. Like, just cut to the part where now I'm here and then keep the story going.
But no. The author, they like consulted with a geologist
Yeah,
and
I
spent
don't-
hours researching it. So it's
No,
got to
I
go on
don't.
the page. You have to hear
I
about
don't
this
need
because it's
that.
very important. Like, this area was formed when there was a volcano event, and then that caused a flood to come in, and it shaped the rocks in this particular way.
I don't know if I talked about it on this show or not, but in composition, there's a theory that is called like, I just blanked on the word, but it's like deconstructive composition. So you compose a song and you have all these parts happening, and it happens throughout like the majority of the song. Like, say the guitar part plays through the whole 2.5 minutes of the song. Deconstructive composition is when you go back and decide, okay, well, this is when these parts are important, and so we're going to delete these accompanying lines or these frequencies or this to get a better overall piece. And sometimes I feel like authors don't ever go back through their work and go, well, it's good that I know how the land was formed, but do I really need it to be explained? Like all these places are all of this. Like, it's great that the author knows the entire history of the world, but does the reader need to know it too? And I kind of think that some authors would really benefit from like taking some stuff out.
Wonder how many authors actually do that, and they're like, but I spent so much time researching it. The readers are going to suffer along with me too.
Yeah.
Like, just out of spite.
I guess. I don't know too many spiteful writers, but I'm sure they're
all
out there.
spiteful.
I seem to recall hearing at one point a line from Stephen King, and I'm grossly paraphrasing here, but it was essentially like, I've never gone back into the editing process and added something.
Yeah.
Like, only take stuff out.
Yeah.
Like,
I like that.
once you've done the first draft, like you're only choosing which parts to take away.
Yeah.
Unless he's doing a re-release, at which point he adds a shit ton of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't actually read that much Stephen King.
No, he re-released The Gunslinger and added like 4 chapters. This was like 10 years ago.
Well, I guess that makes a certain amount of sense, because it's not just like, I'm just going to re-release this book I've written from like way long ago. It's like, well, I've written all this ancillary material, and now I'm kind of filling in certain gaps that have grown up in that time.
It's
And
like
he
bonus features.
Changed names so that it would be less confusing in later books.
Oh, that's good.
That makes sense.
Um,
And he also added some dewbacks in the background,
there's a whole scene where they fly through Mos Eisley.
and some CGI rocks.
It's really important
Very important to the story.
Yeah. It wouldn't be the same.
Jabba
without
made
it.
an appearance.
Yeah. Yep.
So do we have anything else to say about Akira?
How'd you guys feel about the art as far as the transition from the beautifully painted color intros into the black and white in every issue?
I kind of hated the color bits.
Really?
Because it was so disconcerting. I was
Yeah.
like, I just wish this was not here.
And I love the color. Like, if the whole book had been that, I would have been like, wow, this is a, like...
It would have
'cause it's
taken
all,
10 times as
hand-paint-
long.
Oh, God. Yeah, absolutely.
I liked the color parts.
Yeah, and I'm kind of on Toby's side, too, is it's like, it was the jarring page turn from color into black and white outlines every time. I was like, oh, okay, yep, I'm reading this again. That's a very manga thing that they don't really do in Western comics. I don't know if I've ever seen a Western comic do just like 4 pages of color.
You might see it in a
then-
magazine, like Heavy Metal or
Yeah,
something like that,
I
where
could see
there's like
that.
a page or two that are
Right.
in color and then it's in black and
And
white.
that's because printing color is more expensive than printing
Way more
black and
expensive.
white. Yeah. So
Or for part of the magazine, they will use newspaper
yeah.
where it's easier to do black and white. And
Yeah.
some of the pages have gloss with color.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I mean, it grew up out of the manga as magazine tradition, and it still kind of is around. You see it even in modern manga.
I'm interested to know what you think of the ending, like the very end.
The Kaneda as like the head of Neo Tokyo.
Yeah, and they're like riding into the sunset and the city is like building itself around them.
And then he sees like Tetsuo and
Yamaguchi.
It's not Yamaguchi, is it? Yamagunta? I just read this like 20 minutes ago. Yamagata. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I like the whole scene where like the UN shows up and we're like, we're here to help. And they're like, we don't need your help. Get the fuck out of here. Like, we're going to take your stuff and then you can leave. This is a sovereign nation now. I think it ties back into what I was saying about everyone who was enjoying the benefits of Neo Tokyo probably left Neo Tokyo. And this is the chance for kind of the oppressed or the forgotten to finally carve like their own place out in the world. Because Tetsuo and Kaneda both grew up in the same foster home orphanage, and Kay, although we don't know her background really, there's probably a reason she's a revolutionary trying to overthrow the current regime. She probably didn't have the best life, so I think this is kind of the forgotten, the leftovers, the people who that Neo-Tokyo society, the fractured Neo-Tokyo society forgot, and this is a chance for them to kind of form the world in their image, I guess. or like
Yeah.
make a society for themselves for the first time. It feels thematically like it's part of the book. I don't feel like it's a bad ending.
What about you, Cade? What did you think?
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of this book, and so it was kind of just like,
It's hooray! It's over.
so that happened, but I kind of don't super care. I mean, it wasn't done badly. I just wasn't into it. I don't know. It did make me wonder, like, how long did the book go on before the UN would show up? Because, like, that whole time, were they trying to amass the money to do it? Or, I don't know. Just,
Yeah.
I didn't really care enough to think too much about it, I guess is what I was saying.
Kayleigh, you have any final thoughts?
I appreciated the ending, not only because it meant that it was over, but because of Chard's point, where I think it was a chance of this kind of like those who were lower class, or those who had slipped through the cracks of New Tokyo were able to rebuild this nation. And a huge political issue that we face now is when areas are trying to rebuild themselves and outside influences come in and like, okay, well, we're reestablishing rule. Don't worry, everything will be back to the way it was. That sort of a thing. And that's definitely a huge issue.
Well, and in city rebuilding too, the idea that all these people already live here and they've continued to live here, but then when an outside party with more money comes in, they're like, well, all these buildings, I own those now. And we are going to take your way of life and change it into something that is more beneficial to a class that can afford the buildings that are around here.
Yeah.
That kind of gentrification of the buildings are so dilapidated and in poor disrepair, but they never get low enough to the point where the people who actually live there could afford to purchase that building before a third party who has tons of money, just buckets of money they're not doing anything with, is like, well, it's so low. I mean, how could you not buy it? It's a building, and then they just purchase it. And so you have real problems with places that need rebuilding, like what happened in New Orleans after the hurricane and what happens in Detroit, where it's not the citizens of New Orleans who are able to come back and buy their homes. It's people who never lived in New Orleans who just have all this money at their disposal coming in and going, well, this is all ours. And the end of this felt like a backlash against that kind of thing. Because they know if the UN came in and society came back, that all of the same corrupt rich who lived in Neo-Tokyo before would just buy up all the buildings again, and they would have just as little a voice as they did before.
Yeah.
I think the movie goes a long way to show the corruption of the politicians more, because it has the scene where the guy is just cramming his suitcase full of bonds, like bond certificates and stock certificates, to the point where he can't close his suitcase, and he's like dragging it down the street as he's dying to escape the city with like all this money. And as opposed to like Tetsuo's gang, Kaneda's gang, who can't escape the city, and if they did, they would be no better off than they are now. Where kind of like when very rich men will make an economic gamble, and they're like, oh, well, I mean, I made this really desperate gamble to make all this money and I failed, so now I'll just file for bankruptcy, protecting myself so that I don't actually have to suffer the ramifications of having failed, and now I have all my money again and I can just move on. Where people who don't have that kind of bubble can't make those like massive economic gambles, or if they do, it ruins them. So
Yeah.
it's a different kind of... I think that there's a lot in this book about... I mean, it's great to remember this book for like the bike chases and the explosions and all the laser fights and giant mutants and guys with powers, but there's a lot in this book about corruption and about scientific power in the movie, it tends to remind me a lot of Jurassic Park, where the doctor scientists are like, we can make a guy who's like Akira. And then they're like, oh God, we made a guy who's like Akira and we can't stop him. And it's like, yeah, but remember what happened last time? Like, why are you doing this again? You don't have any control over that. You're just because you can make it doesn't mean you should. I think there's a lot of good messages in the book, like in the layers of the book, if you're willing to dig through it.
Yeah, remember, kids, don't make human super weapons.
Yeah, don't.
It's always a bad
and
idea.
if you did make a human super weapon, and then you remember how you made it, don't try to make another one thinking it will work better the next time.
Also, never grow to giant size because it doesn't help.
No.
It doesn't help anybody. Or turning into a snake.
Or a giant baby.
Or a giant
Giant
weird
babies
turd
might
baby.
help in some cases. Maybe not in particular cases, but I feel like it could be
Name
useful.
one example when being a giant baby would be a good idea.
If you're done with life,
I guess.
you don't want to do anything anymore, just want to be a giant baby.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's fair, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
I don't
saying.
know. I think the reason Akira is still influential is not just in the visual styling, but because a lot of the feelings of like being an outsider, being lost, being oppressed still resonate with a lot of people.
Well, yeah. I mean, given that we currently live in a cyberpunk dystopia, and I
Yes.
swear to God we do,
Yeah.
this is a very important story to read and understand.
I still don't feel enough like I'm living in a cyberpunk dystopia, and I think this is my personal theory. It doesn't feel like the future yet because we haven't chosen to dress like it's the future. I
That's
think if
true.
we all went out tonight and got like crazy mohawks and like spiky vests and all of that, and like more
Glowy
like
bracelets.
Yeah, more like neon colored
I
sunglasses.
was going to say like a solid piece of chrome
I tried
metal
this in
that
high
goes,
school
like,
and nobody
across
else
your
joined
entire
me.
face.
You were ahead of your time, Cade. We know this. But yeah, you need like, just pieces of metal like implanted into you places.
And like transparent raincoats that we
Oh.
just wear all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was we can all do this now and we'll feel more like we're living in a cyberpunk dystopia. Also, every time you log into any website or account that you have to look at the camera and say, I'm in.
I do that.
And then I think those two things combined will make us feel more like we're living. Also, if it was never sunny.
What about a solar panel
why I live in
raincoat?
Olympia.
Yeah, exactly. Solar powered raincoat?
A solar panel raincoat so that my cell phone can be plugged in at all times.
Maybe that's why they're wearing all that metallic stuff in those movies, because they're charging their cell phones that didn't know existed.
That for me, just, I mean, as a complete aside, my favorite part of watching old science fiction that's set in the future, which is at this point now the present,
Yeah.
is that nobody ever thought of wireless.
Yeah.
Like you have to plug into everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I need to go make a phone call. Let me
me
go down,
jack
find a
into-
phone booth.
R2D2 doesn't have Wi-Fi. He has to physically socket into everything.
Yeah. If you read old Marvel 2099 comics, they still have phone booths.
Yeah.
Like people don't have cell phones or any kind of like thing like that.
Well, there's a great article written about Star Wars as the future of a construction revolution. Like everything is bigger in
Yeah.
Star Wars, like battle stations and starships, and like the construction revolution of physics occurred in Star Wars, but not one of communications technology, which is what we had.
Yeah.
So
They had wireless in Star Trek, didn't they?
they had like video.
Yeah, they had the
phones.
communicators,
Yeah.
which is basically like, I mean, it kind of was like a cell phone, but it didn't do it. Like they had a separate tricorder.
Yeah.
Like, why would you not just build that in?
It's an app now.
Yeah.
The tricorder app. In the next J.J. Abrams movie, I want that.
But like the idea of like being able to instantly communicate with anybody you want to isn't something
Yeah.
that really occurred to a lot of people until like
They
well
did
into
have
the 90s.
like ship to ship communications.
But
Yeah.
it was still like radio waves though. They're like tuning into frequencies and a lot of stuff. It was
Oh, okay.
It was very like even in Star Wars,
Yeah.
like the ship to ship communication is like a two-way radio.
When the first Star Wars movie, Han is like, oh, here, let me go back to this other station and punch in the calculations for our hyperspace jump. like on this special hyperspace computer
Yes.
that's its own thing that
Yeah.
just does that.
Yep.
And I have to do it by hand.
Yeah. I'm surprised that he's not like loading in like data cards.
Oh yeah, like Captain Kirk and all of his
Yeah.
3.5-inch floppies that he had to constantly put into the computer.
My favorite is in like old futuristic stuff where they'll put like very clearly like it's a tape cassette that they're putting into something, and they're like, "Well, let's watch this."
Oh, the
message
data
they
tapes.
left." Yeah, these data tapes. I love it. So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone, do me a favor, and we'll start dressing like it's the future, starting tomorrow, and then we'll all feel better. About
Agreed.
it. We'll feel more like we're part of our own sci-fi movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I think that brings us to the part of the show where we now recommend a book. If you liked Akira, which I think will be difficult for Cade and Kayleigh,
No.
because they didn't like it. Oh, okay. Are you just going to recommend a book you also hate?
Oh no.
Well, Cade, why don't you start with for us then?
Okay, so I'm actually gonna pitch the same thing I did on Pluto.
Ooh.
If you liked Akira, check out One Piece. It's got a lot of, well, not a lot of, but it's got some of the same themes. It's got, the group of people banding together. It's a lot more humorous. Well, depending on your humor, but it's got a lot more slapstick. So
Yeah.
that's my humor. I don't know. It's a good read. One day we'll talk about it on a long run, but not yet. But yeah, so if you liked Akira, check out One Piece.
Cool. Kayleigh's recommending what we are reading. She's picking what we're reading next for the long run. Do you also have a recommendation of something if you liked Akira, or are they the same? Because we can come back to
if you like Akira, you'll like the book that I'm going to pick. But I'm going to say, if you are like me and you don't have a lot of patience for manga or anime, something that is really good that you will enjoy is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Ooh, it's my favorite manga.
Because it's just
awesome.
great. It's awesome. It's fantastic, and everything about it's perfect. So there you go.
Cool.
It's super good. Story of two brothers decide to become state alchemists, which are like state-sanctioned magicians for the army. And they're doing this so they can learn about a mythical thing called the Philosopher's Stone to fix a horrible mistake they made when they first dabbled in alchemy. And then you uncover that there's so much more to this big conspiracy, and it's awesome. And I think
really
if you
great.
like the like political corruption and stuff from Akira, and also the sweet action and like powers,
Yeah,
you'd dig it too.
It has a lot of things that kind of, but talking about how Akira is so influential,
Mm-hmm.
you definitely see that influence in this. But I just really love the manga and everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if you feel like you don't want to give manga a second chance, you should read this and also watch.
So the manga is
because
called Full Metal Alchemist. The show
Yeah.
is called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Well, and then there's
Because when they originally adapted it to anime, the manga wasn't done, and they eventually ran out of issues to adapt, and they were like, "We're just going to make up our own story." And then the
It
anime
never goes well.
It didn't go well in this case for sure, and so that took a very different turn. And then once the manga was done, they decided to go back and redo an anime, or not redo, but do an anime that followed the manga more closely. So the anime to watch would be Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
yeah,
So
and then the manga to read would be Full Metal Alchemist.
yeah. But I don't recommend watching Full Metal Alchemist, the original anime series, although I started with that.
I started with that too because that's what was
Yeah,
on
that was there.
Adult Swim.
Yeah. Anyway,
but it's not
has-
terrible.
51 episodes.
that would be the original show, because the new one has like 100. Well, it's 100 chapters in the manga, so
I think it's
maybe-
only 26 episodes or something. I think it's shorter than.
No, it's pretty. I think 51 might be Brotherhood then. I don't know.
you'll-
You'll find
Either
it.
way, you'll
find
fit-
it.
It's
It's on
not hard to
Netflix.
differentiate.
Yeah,
them.
it is on Netflix.
You're not going to count the episodes.
Well, you
No.
might,
Well, a
but
friend of mine actually gave me a DVD set.
Well,
that-
it'll say Brotherhood on it really big if it is the new one.
oh,
yeah.
okay.
It'll
then
also
it's
have a
not.
different release date on it.
yeah.
That's
But Toby, what would you recommend to people if they enjoyed?
I actually have two recommendations.
Not allowed.
I'm first going to recommend, I think, the thing that I generally recommend when we talk about manga, which is my favorite post-apocalyptic fiction, which is Battle Angel Aelita, which is super good and really fun and full of punching and kicking,
Sweet.
which is always a good time. The other thing that I wanted to recommend is, so one of the things that we didn't really talk about on this episode was the relationship between Akira and the X-Men, because of course the X-Men came first. But I wanted to talk about the thing that they were both kind of pulling a lot of material from and were influenced by, which is a 1940s science fiction story called Slan by A.E. Van Vogt. And this was kind of a very early, like, mutant psychic power kind of story where there's basically a genetically altered race of humans called Slans who have like psychic powers and they're super strong and super smart and they don't get tired and they can like enter into healing trances and heal from injuries. And they are feared and hated by humans and they're like hunted to near extinction. And this book is very influential on Akira as well as the X-Men. And you can especially see this in the opening scene of Akira, especially the movie, where Sakaki has like escaped and he's being hunted down, which very strongly mirrors a scene early in Slan. It might even be the opening of Slan. So if you were kind of interested in like the like mutant psychic power, like that whole aspect of Akira, I recommend that you check out Slan.
Sweet.
What about you, Chard? What would you recommend?
I am going to recommend something that I've been rereading recently, but it is a book I have pitched before on the show, and that is a modern Western comic by the name of East of West, which is an image book by Jonathan Hickman, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I believe so.
And it is it's an alternate history, but in the future of an alternate history. So
That's my favorite one.
Yeah, at the end of the Civil War, it ended very differently, and instead of reuniting the nations, it fractured it further into 5 nations. And the event that caused that was it was like the joining of the Native American tribes together to form like a third invading army. And then you have the South, the North, the League of like First Nations people or Native American people, and then you have China on the West Coast because they eventually like made their way over, and there's a 5th nation that I can't remember who it is off the top of my head.
I have not read it.
But it's set in the future of that, so there's like crazy technology and spaceships and like weird cities built and all this, and the world is beholden to the rules of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse returning every so many years. And this time the ground opens and like the 3 of the 4 members of the apocalypse, horsemen of the apocalypse, war, famine, and pestilence, get up out of their like tombs, and they're like, what? Something went wrong, because they're all children. And also the grave that is Death's is missing. So he got up and has been roaming around the world for a while. And it's kind of this battle, a political battling between the 5 nations and who's going to align with these forces of nature that are Death and the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse. Very much reminds me of some of the like the political posturing that goes on later with like, oh, I'm aligning with Akira and Tetsuo, and like that'll be how I become an important power player, and like all of this kind of political behind the scenes intrigue. I think also if you like that from Game of Thrones, you would dig East of West as well. But there's some cool twists pretty early on, and you find out some stuff about death and what he's been doing on the Earth and why.
Gardening.
A lot of gardening, mostly. Spoilers. It's entirely a book about garden. No, it's not. Yeah, Death's
he's got that scythe.
He actually doesn't. He's like Western style. He wears a cowboy hat. He's all white and he shoots like revolvers. He rides like a bug dog motorcycle. It's like it's got handlebars like a motorcycle, but it like is like a dog or grasshopper style thing. It like runs along the plains like a horse robot.
Wow,
it's
that
really
is weirder
really
than I was
cool.
prepared for.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's very cool. And I guess, I mean, without spoiling too much, Death fell in love with a human woman. And there are a lot of ramifications because of that. And so, which that woman is also an amazing character in the book, too. So, yeah, and it just talks about like the cycles of incarnation of these. It goes back to the last time they were all alive and what they did that time, because that's the time that Death fell in love and kind of broke the cycles and messed everything up. And there's this big prophecy that the Horsemen of the Apocalypse are trying to uphold, and so all the political leaders, they basically put these people into place to be like, do you believe in the prophecy? And they're like, no. And then they kill them, or they're like, yes. And then, okay, you get to be a politician still. So there's a lot of crazy shit going on. And it's awesome. And all of that stuff I described happens in like the first trade. So go get the first trade of East to West. Is $10 as an image first. So it's very cool sci-fi stuff. I
Nice.
really dig it. But Kayleigh is in charge of picking the book that we are reading for the next long run. So
Yes.
in 2 to 3 months' time, we will be reading...
Elephantmen by Richard Starkings and a whole lot of artists.
Yeah, finally.
So Elephantmen was one of the first comics I actually started reading. I'm not entirely sure how. I just know that I saw it on the shelf at Gabby's, and I was like, oh, that looks good. And so I want to talk about it as sort of like an introductory book, also reading it, now being really into comics, and different thought changes I've had, things like that. Basically, this series follows the story of these creations called Elephantmen, which were created by a secret evil corporation called Mappo, to end a war. And there are these hybrids between human DNA and crocodiles, elephants, rhinos,
Hippos.
zebras, tigers,
Yeah.
all these different deadly creatures, basically. And the story mostly follows the stories of these individual characters and individual elephant men after the war, and after they've kind of become a part of society and are recognized as a thing that exists, and people are really uncomfortable with them. And there's a lot of racist sort of dialogue that surrounds their treatment. There's also like sort of a fetishization of elephant men, and it's just a really interesting, great way of looking at race and looking at how we perceive others, or what we deem to be the other.
Well, and it also has the same kind of stigma of like, well, you can't choose how you were born. None of the elephant men were volunteers,
Right.
Like they were made. They weren't like, oh, we're army volunteers that choose to have our DNA spliced. Like they were grown in a lab. And so there's a constant theme of like, well, I was never asked, no one ever asked me if I could be made.
Right.
Like,
and
this isn't my fault.
And some of them were so deeply programmed to be soldiers and warriors and murderers that they can't actually break that cycle. And some of them get put down, and some of them just go insane, trying to integrate into society. How I would recommend to read this book is read volumes 1 through 6, and then go back and read the 0 volume, or at least read the 0 volume some point after volume 4, I would say, which I believe was around the time it came out. I can't remember if it came out before or right after 5.
So Zero Volume includes War Toys, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So War Toys came out like somewhere in the middle, but it was a prequel. It was about them being made as weapons.
Right.
Which is one of the first things I read of Elephantmen, because it was like one of the things you could easily get as a standalone hardcover.
Oh, yeah.
And then I read Hip Flask, which is a different side series, and
Right.
then I've only recently like tried to figure out where Elephantmen fits in.
Well, it's really interesting because you have Hip Flask is like my favorite character.
Yeah, same.
He is a detective hippo. And so he has a lot of these fantastic pulpy stories that surround him. And Starkings does a lot of stories where it's like Hip Flask and the Amazon Queen and things like that. And I absolutely love those stories. And in the collected trades, which are a great value for your dollar, by the way, they're huge.
Yeah.
And they're about...
They're like 30, 35?
No, they're $20 a piece.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they're about the same thickness as maybe 3 or 4 trades, standard
Yeah.
trades.
They're about 3, yeah.
Yeah, and then you get a bunch of beautiful art and sketches and inspiration pieces and stuff like that in the back as well. Yeah, that's what I'd recommend reading.
So we're reading the first 6 volumes and the Zero.
No,
Yeah.
we're reading the whole thing, which is 7 volumes.
Well, yeah, it's 7 volumes total. It's volumes 1 through 6, which are what's out right now, at least in collected editions. And then there is a 0 volume.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is no volume number 7.
No.
Not yet.
There are 7 volumes that are 0 through 6.
Right.
Right.
0 being the last one you should read.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Or a later one. You should.
Yeah. You should
Sure.
read it at least a little bit after.
Okay, I just asked because volume 6 contains 40 to 49, and there's 62 issues out right now.
Yeah. So he has not collected
Okay.
the other
And
one.
we're not reading any of the Elephantmen 20 to 60 trades.
I probably not. Is that in the future or past?
The future past.
The future past.
In the year
Well, this whole
20
series takes
29.
place at least 200 years into our future.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, volume 1 starts in 2259.
Okay. So we are reading everything that's collected into the
Which
The
is
trades.
probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it's a really good value, and also it's less confusing than when I was trying to read it and everything was like in small trades and I didn't know what order anything
Yeah.
went in. So this is much easier. There's also
Yeah.
a couple
It
like
looks like it's a different series.
and that one might be.
2260.
It might be.
And there's also a couple different like standalone
Yeah.
like fairy tale type stories
Yeah.
and like bonus stuff that
And-
we're
Well, those are actually put into the
well,
larger
good.
collected
There you go.
trades. Kind of as, okay, well, we just hit you with all this terrible emotional weight. Have a cute story about Hip Flask and the Amazon Queen.
have a good time.
To have a good time. All right, now we're back to the emotional pain.
Okay, so the trades that don't have numbers are... Because I'm noticing...
well,
I'm just looking on Amazon to see
Well,
what...
they originally released them all as just Elephantmen this, Elephantmen this,
Oh,
and
okay.
all
Yeah.
of those then ended up as the new collections, which are 1 through 6 of the like oversized definitive, more Europe, what he calls like European style comic collection,
Yeah.
which is like
Okay.
bigger, more stuff.
Yeah, they're
All right.
really, I think that's pretty much what comic book shops sell, are the large collections.
Well, a lot of the ones that Cade's looking at on Amazon are out of print. They're
Yeah.
older stuff that you can't get anymore.
So it's the things that are currently in print.
Yep, 1 through 6 and 0. And
right.
we'll be checking those out in a couple months. Otherwise, we will see you back on a main episode.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening, everybody. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for listening, everybody. Please make sure to support us by leaving an iTunes review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can also support us on Patreon and follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, YouTube, and Facebook. The info for each can be found on our website at viewfromthegutters.com. Thanks again for listening, and as always, keep reading.